right. So, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for coming and Zapwork for having me here. I've been asked to give a talk about the metagame in EVE, espionage, which is usually a popular topic, an aspect of EVE that is unique to the game compared to pretty much any other MMO out there. I apologize, my PowerPoint, my pretty little font that I had didn't survive the trip to Vegas. So anyway, so before we get into this, which is essentially storytelling about things that we've done in the past, we being Goonswarm with the GIA, the Goonswarm Intelligence Agency, when something in the metagame goes wrong, usually you don't hear about it. So most of what we're going to be talking about are spy capers, things that we have achieved, things that we've done, and it's going to sound very full of ourselves. It's going to be, there's a degree of hubris. So before we get into that and the various tales, I just want to say we are bad at EVE. We have never necessarily been the best alliance and the most effective spy agency in the game. We forget to pay our SOV bills, our alliance periodically implodes, our CEO steals our Titan fund, other CEOs have disbanded our alliance. It's not so much about the leadership of Goonswarm when we're talking about espionage and EVE, it's really the line agents who are the ones who are out there succeeding, pulling off these heists, and then ending up in the media. So before we talk about the metagame, we have to describe what the metagame itself is. It's everywhere in EVE, and a lot of people don't like that. There's some people who are offended by the idea of a metagame. You have the media itself could be considered part of the metagame, the politics, the interactions between the alliances, the diplomacy. You have things like Jabberlon 5, which is literally a smoke-filled back room, which has every major alliance leader in it on one Jabber server, which is actually an invention of Sean Smith. There's the counterintelligence aspect of it. And for players like myself, consider the metagame to be more interesting than the game and the client. I rarely log into EVE Online myself. I spend most of my time talking to people on Jabber or on Skype or on Mumble. And it's the interactions between the people more than the spaceships blowing themselves up. So everything that I'm about to tell you is absolutely 100% true, except for everything that I'm lying about. And I'm not going to tell you which is which. So choose to believe whatever you feel like. When we talk about the metagame, one of the first questions that is asked by people who are new to EVE, in particular, is where do you draw the line? Is there a line where there's too much metagaming, and what is the point where you've crossed that line and you've done something horrible, you've done something offensive, etc.? This is actually kind of difficult. I mean, if you go to a World of Warcraft player and you start talking about metagaming, if they even know what it is, a lot of them will think that it's dishonorable, that you're not supposed to do it, that it is a horrible thing. And even within EVE, there are still today a lot of people who consider honor to be their lives and that they look down on other people who don't follow that particular standard. What's weird about EVE and what's weird about the line where it is that what used to be really horrible and awful and you couldn't do it back in the day, like login traps or control queuing in the middle of a fight, even spying itself was, in the early days of EVE, before Guiding Hand Social Club, considered to be horribly offensive. So in practice, the question of how far is too far is answered by saying it's 1 inch further than your enemy is willing to go. If you don't go that way, typically speaking, you lose your alliance and you're screwed. So before we founded the Goonfleet Intelligence Agency, a lot of times modern Goonswarm is seen as an entity that is as awful as possible, since we come from somethingawful.com. But when we started the organization in late 2005, originally when Goons came to this game, we wanted to be good citizens. We wanted to be respected in the EVE community. Many of the things that Goonswarm is known for today was illegal and would get you kicked out of the organization when it was founded. We cared about the respect of the EVE community. We didn't have the motto of we're not here to ruin the game, we're just here to ruin your game. We didn't have a spy agency. Scamming was banned. You actually even were not allowed to post on Evo And you would get in a lot of trouble if we figured out that you were posting with an alt. We had a method to try to detect who was using NPC alts to post there and get them in trouble. So at around March of 2006, I decided that I wanted to get involved in spying because it's just something that always interested me. And I approached the leader of Goonswarm at the time, Remedial, who was our founder, about setting up some sort of spy agency. This is before the Great War began. This is before we even had space. We were living in Syndicate at the time. And there was such a stigma against espionage, and it was such a controversial thing, and the respect of the EVE community mattered so much that I was told that I could maybe, after a great fight, set up a fight with the other directors, set up an espionage organization, but it would have to be only within the directorate, and we had to keep the very idea of a GIA a secret. Now, of course, you actually can't run a spy agency if it's just the directors doing it. You need manpower, you need line agents, and so it didn't really work out very well in that. We moved on from that, and we opened up recruiting to everyone within Goonswarm. We announced that we had an agency, and we started getting spies. Our first operation was very humble. It was against an organization called NORAD that lived in Outer Ring, and we had a login trap to take down a freighter. This was handled by Nick Niven, who was our first female agent, and what she ended up doing was joining a corporation within NORAD, which was moving. They were moving because we had invaded Outer Ring as best as you can invade NPC nullsec. And they loaded every single asset that they had into freighters. Freighters were very rare at the time. This is, again, early 2006, and in that area, it was quite valuable. And they loaded everything that they had into the freighter. We used a login trap to catch them. They didn't think they had scouts. It didn't matter because we had all of our guys logged off at the gate. They jumped through the gate. 20 goons log in, attack the freighter, and off they go. The funny thing about that was, even after we did that, they didn't believe that this girl who had just joined their corporation about 3 days previously could have had anything to do with it, even though she was online at the time. One person in the corporation accused her of having some sort of responsibility, and one of the things that we'll see over and over in EVE is the White Knight effect, which we try to use in espionage wherever possible, where people will step up and defend female agents even when it's pretty obvious that their hands were bloody. So she didn't even get kicked out, and that corporation rapidly ceased to exist. Once we got involved in Sov warfare in Scalding Pass, this was during the period of Red Swarm Federation, one of the first capers that we pulled that was beyond just blowing up a freighter or a login trap was against an organization called Veritas Immortalis. Veritas Immortalis, this is early, I'd say October 2006. Veritas was part of the Southern Coalition, which owned the Galactic East at the time, along with Laca Volterra and various other hangers-on in that coalition. Goonswarm had been invaded by Band of Brothers in July of 2006. That was the marking of the start of the Great War. And we moved to Innsmother with Red Alliance and formed Red Swarm Federation along with Tau Ceti Federation. So we had RA, Goonswarm, and TCF. The very first Sov that we ended up taking was in a little system called JLO. And once we invaded Veritas Immortalis in Scalding Pass and began that campaign with as the junior partners in the Red Swarm Federation, Veritas had to evacuate. Now, back in the day, everyone believed that if you were in Goonswarm, you were a new player in a T1 frigate. The assumption was that it was impossible for someone in Goonswarm to have a carrier, or any kind of capital ship, or even fly a battleship with T2 guns. So what had happened was that one of our agents had acquired a veteran character because he had come into a lot of ISK or a lot of money, or it's not entirely clear. And he bought for himself a 55 million skill point character, which was quite a lot in that era, in 2006. He had been helping out Veritas Immortalis, and he volunteered for the worst possible job. Now, this is one of the classic ways to get an agent in place, is you find the scut work, usually logistics, hauling, dealing with posses, or freightering, anything that anybody in the Alliance doesn't want to do, and you volunteer for it helpfully, and you keep your nose down and you do a lot of work. Blitter had done that, and this was before jump freighters. He had a carrier, and this was very exciting to Veritas Immortalis because they could use it to actually move things. They needed to move things because they were going to lose JLo to goons, and they only had a few hours to evacuate all of their assets as an alliance. This had been one of their home bases. So it was around this time that we decided that we were going to burn the agent and see what we could do to damage Veritas. Since there was no such thing as a jump freighter, and this was even before the contract system, evacuation was kind of difficult. What you ended up doing was saying, all right, well, only 4 people in this alliance have carriers. Just give them your stuff, and they'll just do runs back and forth and back and forth and back and forth to evacuate your stuff to a station that's not falling. What ended up happening was our agent volunteered to help with evacuation and started doing runs over and over and over again with his carrier to take their stuff and move it to a system that wasn't going to be taken by Goonswarm. Each time that the members of Veritas Immortalis would open a trade window and hand him stuff, a few minutes later his carrier would undock, and sure enough it would jump off to KZF, which is one of the system they were evacuating to, and then he'd jump back and they'd give him more stuff, jump, 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 jump. Hours this went on. The only problem was that every time he jumped to KZF, his carrier was empty, and every time that they were handing him things into his trade window, it just simply went into his hangar. So Veritas Immortalis had inadvertently evacuated almost all of their alliance-level assets, and not just alliance-level assets, member-level assets, everything that these people had, into one of our agents' hangars. After that, Veritas lasted about 2 more weeks, and that was the end of them. That was one of the first eye-opening heists that we pulled off, and we really sort of decided to think bigger, I guess you'd say. In the ISS conflict, which happened a little bit later, there's a conflict between Interstellar Starbase Syndicate, which is a dead alliance now, and Interstellar Alcohol Conglomerate, which has also unfortunately passed away. This was during a break in the Southern Coalition War. After Red Storm Federation took Scalding Pass and Wicked Creek, Lock of Volterra sued for a non-invasion pact with us, and we had a proxy war. Proxy wars happen periodically in nullsec when 2 blocks don't really want to fight each other. You could argue that the recent Fountain conflict was a proxy war between the CFC and In3, with Test as the proxy. So here you had RSF and Lock of Volterra taking sides. Red Storm Federation sided with IAC, and Lock of Volterra and Mercenary Coalition sided with ISS. The funny thing about this is this situation, the destruction of ISS, occurred because of something that had actually happened at the outbreak of the Great War. ISS had a neutrality policy. They saw themselves as a helpful merchant empire. That was their role-playing gimmick. Excuse me. They didn't allow you to take a side in the conflicts in nullsec, and what they wanted to do was build up a piece of the empire market in nullsec, like bringing JITA, or ULI, as the case may be, into null. So if you were a director in ISS, you could never openly comment on politics. You couldn't make forum posts saying this is good, this is bad, because your precious neutrality would be compromised. At the time, there was a person named Jacob Majestic, who was a high-level director within ISS in July of 2006. When Band of Brothers invaded Goonswarm, Jacob Majestic said that the reason for the outbreak of the Great War, which was the public line about how goons are terrible people and a cancer on Eve and must be destroyed, blah, 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 Jacob Majestic made a terrible error. He didn't realize that his own alliance, despite its front of neutrality, was basically being funded by LV and Bob. They will still deny that accusation, of course. Of course, when Jacob Majestic said that this was what they were doing was foolish and wrong, and that the invasion of Syndicate and the attack on Goonswarm was not something that should happen, he ended up getting stripped of his directorate, publicly shamed, and told that he was a disgrace to ISS and the ISS Navy. It took him about 8 months to get his directorate position back and get roles within the ISS Navy. And that's around the time that the proxy war started between ISS and IAC. Right after Mercenary Coalition said that they were joining the conflict and brought 140 carriers in a great show of force on the side of ISS, that's when we with IAC moved in under the old POS war system, and we began simply stripping towers using Jacob Majestic's character. All you needed was config starbase, that role back in the day, and you could take down a tower, a player-owned starbase, and a POS was what actually controlled SOV before the Dominion system in 2009, which meant that if you had a spy before Dominion, you could completely change the holding of a system, or all of ISS's systems. So in one night, on the eve of what had been to be a great battle, we simply took ISS's SOV claims out. They only had 3 stations in catch, and we took them all. We also took out the ISS Navy hangar, everything that they had, and Jacob Majestic had his revenge at last. So be careful about publicly shaming your directors, because it can come back to bite you in the ass. All right. The Lac of Volterra conflict was a great period of metagaming. We had lots of spy versus spy action. What ended up happening after ISS died was that the Red Swarm Federation ended up fighting Lac of Volterra all over again. It stopped being a proxy war. Since they had lost their proxy war, it just moved on into a direct invasion, which is the kind of thing that happens. They didn't really have a spy agency because they were more of an old school honor-oriented alliance. But at least one of the directors, named Lalante, had ISK. And at the time, while the GIA was one of the major spy agencies in the game besides Guiding Hand Social Club, GHSC, of course, is much more well-known in that era than the GIA. We were small fries. Kugutsuman, who is a person that you might have heard before, began openly advertising his services as a mercenary agent. Now, you have mercenary agents, they accept ISK for intel, and that's not normally something that you want to do. You don't want to pay ISK for money, because then you don't want to pay ISK for intel, because people will tell you anything, and you have no idea about the quality of that intel. But in this case, Kugutsuman was the real deal. He actually was a mercenary agent who was going to give the intel to Lac of Volterra. And worse for Goonswarm, not only did he start working for Lac of Volterra and do his job, he was a very experienced computer security professional. So what ended up happening was he gave a cookie for our forums that allowed Lac of Volterra, Lalante, to read everything that we had on our forums. He could read our director forums. He actually had the login to Remedial, our CEO's email. So everything that we were doing, everything that they posted, everything that we thought of, all of our plans, if we wrote it down, they knew about it. Conveniently, though, we had our own agent, who was a man named Osmodeus, and instead of being someone who is on the SIGINT side of things, just using computer access, I don't want to say hacking, I don't know. We don't know the details of what happened, we only know the leaks that occurred. Lalante had hired Kugutsuman, but he made the fatal mistake of posting his own access and posting rips of our forums and posting rips of our CEO's mail onto the Lac of Volterra director forum. So the way that we found out about Kugutsuman doing all of this stuff was simply because our own agent was able to see Lalante posting, hey guys, I have this spy and he's doing all this. And we were able to trace the leak and shut that down using Osmodeus, thankfully. And then something really, actually extremely significant in the history of EVE happened, which is Lalante decided that he did not need to pay Kugutsuman what he chose, his price. He just didn't pay the guy. He screwed him. He paid him for 1 month, thereabouts. I think it was a few billion ISK to get the access to the Goonswarm forums. And then he told Kugutsuman to go screw himself. That was not wise. Kugutsuman approached me and said, Lalante, Lac of Volterra, all of this, it's not working out. They're not paying me what I want. I want ISK, and I will work for you. And I said, well, I don't pay for intel, because for all I know, you're going to screw me over. So what I said was, look, I mean, I'm fine to work with you. There's very few people who are getting involved in the espionage metagame. I'm not going to give you ISK. Show me that you're legit, right? I know that you somehow got access to my forums, but show me that you're not just trying to screw me here. You're approaching me, it could be a false flag operation. I start working with you, you backstab me. You always have to worry about that. So as a show of good faith, he started opening up the forums of Band of Brothers. First, it was just Black Nova Corporation, which was one of the Bob Corps at the time. And then he got into the Rikoku forums. And once he got into the Rikoku forums, that was when the public revelation of the T20 scandal, which you might have heard about, came out, and that turned the tide of the Great War. Is there anybody here who does not know what the T20 scandal was or about this area? Like, raise your hand if you've never heard of this. All right. So I don't want to bring up old wounds too much, but basically what he discovered was that there had been developer misconduct, and on the Rikoku forums he discovered that there was a CCP developer named T20 who had a character within Rikoku, within Band of Brothers, and that he had left behind and given to the organization some of his T2 BPOs, including a Saber BPO, which is, of course, one of the best interdictors in the game and a very significant asset. This created a massive scandal that rocked the game itself, and it was in the press, not just the gaming press, but in the wider media, and this was a huge outcry against Band of Brothers from the people who were already trying to kill them, and that set up the second phase of the Great War. After that, their reputation was tarnished. They started being joked about being Band of Developers, and this was entirely simply because Lalante did not pay Kugutsuman, and then he went digging around on the Bob forums to try to demonstrate his bona fides to Goonswarm, and all bloody hell broke loose. Moving away from scandals and Kugutsuman, one of the things that I've learned in EVE is you never, ever, 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 ever piss off the Russians. The Russians have lived in the galactic northeast and southeast in one flavor or another, based out of Stain or Innsmother in the drone regions, and it's just not a good idea. Periodically, Goonswarm is criticized because we never get involved in these conflicts. There was the Northern Coalition versus the Russian organization war that destroyed the Northern Coalition in the galactic northwest, the drone region invasion a couple of years ago. And with the exception of us at one point destroying an alliance called White Noise that lived in Branch, which was nominally Russian, we just don't get involved. Whenever the Russian community ends up fighting other Russians, we don't pick a side. It's just not wise. So during the Lac of Volterra War, when Titans still had their remote doomsday ability, these ships were essentially unkillable. And there was only really one way that you could get rid of a Titan. Lac of Volterra had a couple, Band of Brothers had like 5, which was huge. And the remote doomsdays were nearly impossible to deal with. A remote doomsday was someone would open a Sino-serial field, and an area effect doomsday would come through it, would wipe out every ship you had on the field, and the Titan didn't have to be exposed. These days, Titans, of course, can only impact capital ships. It's a single target thing, and the Titan has to be on the field, and there's limits to whether the Titan can actually jump out and escape. Back in the day, all you had to do was have a Titan at the edge of a POS shield in the system, essentially no risk whatsoever. A frigate would buzz by a fleet, a hostile fleet, pop open a Sino, and then the doomsday on the Titan could be fired through that frigate's Sino anywhere else in the system. It was completely ridiculous, broken, and stupid, and that is why we despise supercaps. Well, to deal with something like that, you have to get creative, and if you're a certain Russian alliance leader who will not be named, the way that you get creative is you come to me and you say, Mittani, we need to, I have a terrible Russian accent, I'm sorry. Mittani, we need to kill the Titan. We need to kill the Titan. This one Titan in particular was the Enslavers. The Enslaver, we might know him, actually ended up working for CCP later and has since left the company. I think his name was CCP Diagoras, John Turbofield, who is a friend of mine now, actually. But he had this Titan and he was doing terrible things to us. Mittani, we need to kill the Titan. We need to kill, I don't know how to kill the Titan. I mean, you can't, it's got a remote doomsday, there's a POS. Can you find me where he lives? I'm like, you know, they're based in Detorid, right? I mean, they're in Tenerifis. You know this, why are you asking? Like, but the Titan is in Scalding Pass, it's blowing us up. Why do you need to know where he lives? No, where does he live? Where he lives, you find me his address. And I will send my boys. I will send my boys, and in fight, when he has Titan, we will cut the power to his house. You laugh. The scary thing is, I'm not making this up. And that is why we never, ever, ever piss off the Russians. As it happened, we didn't need to do that. I did not tell him where he lived. I do not have the capability of finding out where people live. Yeah. All right. So we already kind of talked about the T20 stuff, so I'm not going to go into it too much, which is, again, after not paying Gugutsumin, which was a terrible error that uncovered all that scandal. And thankfully now we have an internal affairs department, and we don't really have to worry about that stuff within CCP anymore, because IA actually does really good work, and I'm a big fan of them. Probably one of the most high-profile espionage events in EVE was the disbanding of Band of Brothers on February 4th, 2009. The funny thing is that the same agent who ended up helping destroy Band of Brothers came from the same corporation that Asmodeus, our agent within Locke Volterra, who uncovered their access to our forums, same corporation, a little corp called Christ Corp. Tamer Link at one point used to be in Christ Corp with Asmodeus, and then he joined an organization called Igneus Actorta, or something other Latin corp name. Igni, we called them. Ended up within Goonswarm after a few years. But way back in the day, Asmodeus and Tamer Link ended up, were friends and associated with the same organization. Now, the disbanding is a fairly well-known event. Band of Brothers, all of their stuff ceased to exist. This was at the beginning of the second phase of the Great War. Goonswarm abandoned all of its territory in the Galactic East, invaded into the Galactic West, and torched everything that Bob had. That was very dramatic, got a lot of press attention, but what really it began with was a simple recruitment scam. There was a miner named Harkani, and Harkani wanted to join Igneus Actorta, the corporation which Tamer Link was now in. Now, Tamer Link is a very interesting character within EVE. He keeps a lower profile, but he basically runs around scamming people nonstop. And this was one of the earliest recruitment scams that we did. Goonswarm is now well known for recruitment. Actually, excuse me. I'm on live television. What I should actually say is that Goonswarm does not scam, and if you are approached by a recruiter, all it takes is a simple security deposit of approximately 500 million ISK, and you can also get into Goonswarm. And not only is that the case, but we have some very reasonable services to help you get into Goonswarm. We'll jump freighter your stuff out to Declan for you. All you have to do is just load it up in JITA and give your recruiter a contract with that, and we'll move your stuff. Anyway, we have a no scamming policy, but back in the day, occasionally scams happened. And this was one of them. You don't have to worry about this anymore. I would never lie to you. So Tamer Link brings in Harkani and says, okay, you can come into the corp. Harkani is just some minor idiot of no real relevance, and the idea is that Tamer is going to bring him in and take him for everything that he's worth, and then after a couple days, once he has all of his stuff and all of his assets, he's going to boot him out of Igni, give him the finger, and away he goes. Pretty standard issue stuff. Again, we don't do this anymore. This is verboten. We would never hurt you. What ended up happening was when it came time for the scam to be revealed and he was about to kick Harkani out of his corporation, the guy opens a conversation with him and is like, look, I've only been in this corp for 3 days, and I've been mining, and I really enjoy like the sense of community we have here, and I'm having so much fun in your corporation that I know it was a scam, and I know you're going to kick me, but look, this is not my main character. I'm not actually Harkani. I'm a full director in Band of Brothers. And I like you guys so much that I would just like to stay here, and I'm just gonna flip. Like, I like your culture. The guys I've been working for all these years are jerks. Please don't kick me out with my minor character. What can I do for you? Around this point, Tamer Link is like, I don't know what to do. This is above my pay grade. What the hell is this? What is this minor guy saying he's a Bob director? It's probably bullshit. It's probably not true. He's probably lying just to not get scammed and kicked out, but probably should tell my CEO. He tells the CEO. CEO comes to me and is like, what is this? So it turns out that, at first we thought that we were just going to do a smash and grab. I talked to Hargoth. It turns out that it's Hargoth Agmar. who was in fact a full director in Black Nova Corporation, and he also had a character in Tinfoil, which is the executor corp of Band of Brothers. The executor corp in your alliances is what holds the alliance together. It's usually a small corp with only a few directors in it, and those are the keys to the house. If you get somebody who has an executor corp, all sorts of terrible things can happen. But at the time, nobody had ever done a disbanding before, and so we really had no idea what kind of a gift we had been given. We knew that we had probably the best opportunity to destroy our hated enemies ever, and we had to noodle on it. We thought we had to act fast because this guy could change his mind, right? Like right now, he's ready to sell his former friends out. He says he doesn't like them anymore, but give him a few days, he'll have second thoughts, and God only knows what will happen. Normally speaking, you get something like this, we call it a smash and grab. Like, you're going to burn the agent, you're going to take him for everything that he's worth, you find out his roles, you write them all down, you take inventory of the hangars, you take out the wallets, you just grab everything before they can yank his roles, so you have to try to coordinate it as quickly as possible. You use alts, you get him to get more roles, and then ideally speaking, he's logged into multiple accounts simultaneously of his own and just steals everything at once. So the Dreadnought fleet, everything that they had a cache of Dreadnoughts that were in NPC Delve, all of their ships, everything. That's what we wanted to do at first. And the GIA director basically thought about it. We talked amongst ourselves. We were very excited and very nervous about this entire thing. And then it came to us, essentially, that in a moment, it wasn't really a master, amazing plan. It was just a flash of insight, like, wait a second, you've got a guy in the executive corp. That means you could kick out every single corporation in that alliance. You could literally destroy the alliance, and then not only could you destroy the alliance, you could steal their name. Once the alliance is gone, you could take a alt corp. You could immediately just form a corporation. You disband the corporation, you disband the alliance, no more Band of Brothers, and you make your own Band of Brothers as a corp. And then they can't make another Band of Brothers. That's exactly what happened. It was the first major disbanding in EVE, and it rocked everything. And it all began with one guy trying to recruitment scam a minor. And you don't have to worry about that anymore. We're nice people. The introduction of the Dominion Sov system really kind of screwed up large aspects of the metagame. There was a fallow period of espionage in EVE where after 2009 Dominion, the current Sov system, was introduced. They got rid of POS warfare, which was the precursor, and that was bad for spies. You could still do things like disbanding an alliance, but one of the reasons why POS warfare was such a heyday for spying and metagaming was that if you could get the config starbase role, you could de-tower a system like we did with ISS and flip the Sov in a system. You can't do that anymore. The other thing is that before Dominion, it was possible for you to have a surprise attack. So you really needed a network of human agents in all of your major enemies' alliances in case somebody wanted to launch a surprise attack on you, such that you could time your towers correctly. If you had a surprise attack, if you didn't have advanced intel on that, when they hit your towers, they would all come out at the wrong time, and you would be screwed. When Dominion happened, they introduced a system where you have to online an SBU, and an online SBU takes 3 hours. And they can't do anything before that SBU online. So essentially, surprise attacks don't really exist in EVE anymore. You come on, you start onlining SBUs, everybody gets a notification mail about it, and then you have 3 hours to collect yourself, plan a counterattack, and get a response to that. Fountain was a massive conflict in the last few months between the CFC, Test, Tribal Band, In3, and NC. It was a huge war that lasted a couple months, and it was I thought it was a lot of fun. The guys who lost, I don't think, had nearly as much fun, but that's the game. So you had another disbanding in the Fountain conflict. You got to see that with the Nulli Secunda Citizens Alliance, had about 200 Sov systems, I believe. It was the largest territorial disbanding since the Band of Brothers disbanding. That happened in the middle of the war. We had a walk-in agent. He was not actually one of ours. He came in and basically said, I'm sick of these guys for whatever reason, and you guys are the experts on disbanding. I want to screw them over. Walk me through it. So conveniently, I was asleep at the time this happened, so it was kind of an interesting day at the space office, because what ended up happening was I wake up, And this has already occurred, and my directors have arranged it and organized it, and then it's just a matter of exploiting it and cleaning up the mess. Or, in espionage terms, not cleaning up the mess, making as much of a mess as possible and twisting the knife. What was interesting about SBUs, and the reason why I brought the SBUs up, is that it wasn't so much the disbanding of the noli secunda citizens that had a major impact on the war, though that was highly entertaining. It was a forgotten corporation that had actually been in test the entire time that was the single biggest metagaming impact in the Fountain War. A SOV Transfer Corp is what happens when one alliance wants to give their SOV systems to another alliance, and what you do is you put a corporation, just a shell corp, into that alliance, you hand over those SOV systems to them, and then you just move the alliance over. So when it's done properly, it's a fairly clean transfer. Back in the day, before the Fountain conflict, Test was either in the CFC or friendly with the CFC, and we had frequent reasons to do SOV transfers. Test went through a period where they changed CEOs a couple times. There was an administration change from Montolio, who was their leader, to some other guy, I think it was like Montolio to Frasiabi to Injin Kerr, and then to Buddha Buddha. And somewhere along the way, they had forgotten about the fact that they still had a Goon Swarm-owned SOV Transfer Corp within their alliance. That's pretty much, it's not as good as having something in the Executor Corp, but in the Dominion SOV system, it's pretty much the nuts. So what we did with this was, initially speaking, the Fountain War was kind of handled poorly. Some jerk declared the war. That jerk then went to E3 for a week right after declaring the war. And that jerk also didn't really listen to his FCs enough about the doctrines that were being used, and so that jerk was gone, the doctrines were bad, it was a mess. So initially speaking, the offensive into Fountain from the CFC ran into a brick wall, and it's all that guy's fault. But what ended up happening there is that while it wasn't a brick wall, there was then a huge counteroffensive from Test when N3 joined the conflict, when NC. Joined the conflict, when a small division of PL people led by Manny joined the conflict. It was going to be bad. There were people talking about VFK by February or what have you. They were going to be pushing up from Fountain into CFC territory and conquering us out of vengeance. They actually succeeded in taking some of the systems that we had taken back. There was a lot of back and forth in the first couple weeks, and a lot of the focus of the conflict was around a system called 4-EP, which is in northern Fountain, and it eventually became the CFC staging system there. The enemy focused on trying to take these systems back, and what would happen is they would assemble a huge armada, and you'd put down SBUs, siege everything, and when the timers would come out, for some reason, even after they had all of their forces there, the SBUs would disappear. Just as everything came out of reinforced, the SBUs would go offline. And what does that mean if you're not a nullsec person? When the SBUs are offline, that means you can't take the system. If there's no SBUs, you can't conquer anything. Everything is reset, and you basically wasted an entire week's worth of work. So the first time they came to 4-EP and SBUs disappeared, they were very confused. And then there was a spy hunt, because they were looking for a spy. Obviously, there was a logistics level director within Test, or somebody who had config Starbase that did this, that had the roles. This set off a huge witch hunt. Witch hunts are the best. Witch hunts are something that you always want to try to set off in your enemy whenever you do any kind of overt espionage action. So there's a huge witch hunt within Test to try to find which jerk offlined the SBUs. And they tore themselves apart. We knew this because our agents were watching this. And several innocent people within Test were purged or put under suspicion for doing something they had nothing to do with. It happened again, it happened again, it happened again. And each time Test propaganda said that the CFC is so desperate that they're burning spies. Of course, we just spy for fun. We love this stuff. This is not desperation. This is how we play the game. But every time it happened, they said we would burn a spy. They would kick some poor jerk out and say, this was your fault. Look, the CFC burned a spy. That guy's gone. How many more spies do they have? They can't do this anymore. They started using NC. And N3 SBUs to keep this from happening. And They never figured it out. The entire war, they could not, no matter what happened, we knew that as long as we had that corporation within that alliance, it was impossible within the game mechanics for TEST to win, because they simply could not take a system, because they just didn't have the mechanics. They didn't have the SBUs to do it. After that, the tide of the war flipped because they ran into a brick wall a couple times, and then the rest is history. And that is basically that. That's a quick overview. Unfortunately, my font didn't survive, like I said. If you have any questions, you feel free to ask them. And beyond that, thank you very much, and I'll probably be playing Valkyrie for the rest of the day. If anybody wants to ask a question, you can. If not, no big deal. That is entirely possible. I also think that for some reason they have scheduled me, they didn't tell me this actually, that there was going to be a Mittani roundtable. I don't know how I'm supposed to have a roundtable. Like, I'll give you feedback on how Goonswarm could be doing a better job of ruining everything. Help me help you. I'm a helper.
What's your address?
I don't pilot a Titan, so I'm safe.
Or I should say in Russian, he's much pleased for me to be knowing your address.
Pleased to be knowing. Yeah.
Well, I'm with a newer alliance, and how would you say the best way to secure yourself when you have a pretty open recruiting policy against this kind of shenanigans?
You have to be very careful about the roles that you hand out. In the Dominion system, you're a lot safer because you can give out config starbase like candy without having your stuff taken from you. You need to be careful about alt corps to make sure that they aren't shell corps. The spy hunting is tough. It's a whole different ballgame. Counterintelligence in EVE is essentially it's computer forensics. Like it's all like technical stuff about IP addresses and geolocation and things like that. So ideally speaking, if you're in an alliance that's serious about spy hunting, you need to get yourself a counterintelligence. You need to get a forensics professional to help you with that. For somebody just starting out, if you're a small fry, you don't really have to worry about spies that much. Make sure that your executor corp doesn't have that many people in it. Make sure that you scrape your wallets regularly. Make sure that you check the employment history of anybody who is joining your organization that you're going to give roles to. When you're looking at the employment history, don't just look at that of the character. Make sure you do a background check. Look for character sale threads, because people who are big in the metagame will churn characters repeatedly. The other thing you can do is just study other acts of espionage that's happened in EVE. Look at what happened. Look what went wrong. When it's in public, it's obvious what happened. And then just don't make the same mistake that the other guys did.
But if you have a pretty open recruiting, then it's basically all about just monitoring the roles and...
Yeah, I mean, having an agent who doesn't have roles isn't all that dangerous. I mean, the way that you adapt to having a spy in a fleet is pretty simple. Your FCs simply learn to not tell people what's going on and not run their mouths. Because if in your comms you have it set up where you've got command channels, such that the FCs can talk amongst themselves about what they're going to do, then the line members who are in the sub-channels, you know, they're getting told warp here, accept the fleet warp, you know, shoot this guy, shoot the primary. That's not giving an agent that much information. So like in most major nullsec battles, everybody has spies everywhere in each other's comms, but the line level access is not that useful. So it's really just, you can never secure yourself completely about spies, but you can guard your higher level information such that you don't get completely screwed.
Thanks.
No problem. All right, thank you very much.